Good evening. Welcome to the Matthew Kelly Show. It's great being with you last week. Tons of great feedback on social all week. Lots of great questions coming in. Very, very grateful for your feedback, helping me become the best version of myself at this. The topic this evening is not what my son Ralph recommended at dinner table tonight. He is 5 years old. He wanted the topic to be, where do babies come from? But that is not the topic of this evening's conversation. Topic of this evening's conversation is, what do you do when life doesn't turn out as you expected? I think the first thing for us to recognize is that nobody's life turns out as they expected. Nobody's life, it just doesn't happen. They might have plans, have dreams, we all do, but somewhere along the line, those dreams, they get changed, they get impacted, they get broken. Our dreams get broken, but other dreams emerge that we never even imagined, never even thought were possible. And that is part of the mystery of life. I'm going to read you a small section from my new book, Life is Messy, and Ain't That the Truth? The section's called Unexpected. Life didn't turn out the way I expected. In some ways, it has exceeded my expectations, and in other ways, it has disappointed them. Never in my wildest dreams as a child would I have imagined the life I have lived. The adventures, experiences, opportunities, the love I've given and received, and the success I have enjoyed have all far exceeded my expectations. But I also never imagined in my worst nightmares the dark side of these bright lights. We all end up living unexpected lives. There are hopes and dreams that didn't materialize, that I grieve, and I have been surprised and delighted by other unexpected gifts. And there are hopes and dreams that I am glad did not come to fruition. The unexpected goes both ways. Life doesn't unfold according to our plans, but sooner or later, we each have to decide how we are going to make the most of our one brief, unexpected life. It is then that we come face to face with two enduring truths. We cannot live without hope that things will change for the better, and we are not victims of our circumstances. And I think it's these two truths that we struggle with when life doesn't turn out as we expected. We grasp for hope. We want to know, where will our next experience of hope come from? What can we place our hope in? Because literally we cannot live without hope that things will change for the better. Of course, sometimes we want a very, very, very specific thing to change for the better. And that isn't necessarily how life works, or the mystery of life works either. And of course, it's very easy when life doesn't turn out as we expected to throw a pity party for ourselves and to get down and to turn inward. And we tend to implode when we do that. And I've done that as much as anybody in life. So we are not victims. We can choose and make choices today that will lead us to brighter places, to lighter places, to more hopeful places. And so as we begin our conversation, jump into the questions that you've sent me this week. I think it's very important that we get very clear from the start that nobody's life turns out as they expected it to. We all live unexpected lives. We all live unexpected lives. The question is, what do we do? What do we do with our unexpected lives? And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Evan, who is going to feed me the questions tonight. A lot of the feedback last week was, me trying to get the questions off the comments bar and juggle all of that. So welcome, Evan, and let's have that first question.
All right, Matthew. So From Instagram earlier today, Mama on a Journey asks you, motherhood is beautiful, but not every day. How do you manage the downs of any situation that you had high expectations for?
Yeah, so fantastic. Nothing is beautiful every day. Nothing is good every day. Nothing is great every day. Nothing meets our expectations every day. The problem with that is that, your question, like, motherhood is beautiful. Okay, it's impossible to argue against that, right? We're convinced of that in our minds. And your everyday experience of motherhood doesn't gel with that on some days. And that's natural and normal. It doesn't diminish motherhood. It doesn't diminish you. It doesn't diminish motherhood. But the word that I picked up on at the end of your question, how do you manage downs of any situation that you had high expectations for? It's these expectations that we have. We do have high expectations. We have expectations that life will turn out as we hope. We have expectations that people will behave in certain ways. We have expectations that if we do certain things, other things will be the result of those certain things. We have expectations about everything. We have expectations about everyone. And when a gap emerges between what we expect and what actually happens, something has to fill that gap. I call that the expectations gap. And I actually talk about this in one of my business books, which is called The Culture Solution. I talk about it extensively. When a gap emerges, expectations gap emerges between what we expect to happen and what actually happens, something has to fill the gap. And only 5 things fill that gap: disappointment, resentment, anger, frustration, and loss of trust. These are the 5 things that fill the expectations gap: disappointment, resentment, anger, frustration, and loss of trust. None of those things are things we want people feeling towards us, and they're certainly not things we want to feel towards the people we love and care about. And so when there are expectations that don't get met, we have to face that head on. We have to deal with that. If it's in a relationship, we can say to a brother, a sister, a spouse, a colleague, listen, I had this expectation, but this is not, how this is turning out. And we should, because otherwise what will happen? We become disappointed, resentful, angry, frustrated, and loss of trust is what we will experience towards that person. And so the gap, the expectations gap, needs to be managed. Sometimes our expectations are reasonable. Sometimes our expectations are completely unreasonable. This happens in life, in our own lives all the time. The hardest expectations to meet are the ones we don't even know about. So I remember when my little girl Isabel was about 5 years old. It was her birthday, and she had a wonderful party, and she had her friends over and received beautiful gifts. And I was putting her to bed that night, and I asked her, how was your day? Did you enjoy your party? And she talked lavishly about this experience, and then I just saw something come across her face. You just see these things sometimes in people. And I said, what was that one thing you're thinking? And Isabel said, well, I got all these presents, and they're wonderful presents, but I didn't get the present I really wanted. I said, well, what was the present you really wanted? She told me, and it was some little thing, it's like $5. And I said to her, did you tell your mum? that you wanted this present? She said, no. I said, did you tell me? Did I forget? Did you tell me that you wanted this present? She said, no. She said, I just thought you would know. And it's heartbreaking, right? A little 5-year-old, and it's the one thing she wanted most. But the reality is, the hardest expectations to meet are the ones we don't know about. And you have expectations of me, I have expectations of you. Everyone in your life has expectations of you, and vice versa. You know, if I leave home in the morning and, you know, I'm going to the office, you know, what's the last thing my wife will ask me? Most likely, what time we'd be home tonight? You know, and maybe I say 6:30. Usually a day, the way days unfold is by 2 o'clock. If I'm not going to be home at 6:30, I usually know by 2 o'clock. So if 2 o'clock comes around and I know I'm not going to be home by 6:30, if I'm not an idiot, what I should do is call my wife and say, listen, a couple of things come up. I'm going to be a little bit later. Because when I said I'd be home at 6:30, I created an expectation. And if I call my wife, say I'm not going to be home at 6:30, a couple of things come up, what is she most likely to say? She's most likely to say, okay, what time will you be home? And this is when I'm most likely to make a mistake. You know, I might say, I'll be home at 7 o'clock. And knowing that I need all of the powers of the universe, every green light to go in my favor in order to be home at 7 o'clock. Because what am I doing? I'm managing the expectation that I won't be home at 6:30. She's managing back the expectation. What time will you be home? I'm setting a new expectation, 7 o'clock, which has some chance, maybe a high chance of also being disappointed. And what happens when we disappoint expectations? We create a gap, disappointment, resentment, anger, frustration, loss of trust. You know, if somebody's doing some work around your house and they say we'll be done in June and they're not done until September, expectations gap, what fills it? Disappointment, resentment, anger, frustration, loss of trust. If you buy a product and the product promises to clean your clothes and it doesn't clean your clothes, what happens? Expectations gap. What fills the expectations gap? Disappointment, resentment, anger, frustration, loss of trust. And so as we have this conversation, we realize that, you know, these expectations are everywhere, in every situation, with every person, all the time. And so if we go back to the question, you know, about motherhood is beautiful, but not every day. I have these high expectations, and they don't always work out that way. I think it's important for us to focus on motherhood is beautiful. And then I think to really celebrate those moments. And then I think we need a different strategy for when it isn't. Because it isn't always, nothing is. And one of the strategies I share with you, you know, I can't tell you how many people email me, write to me, sharing heartbreaking stories about the loss of a child or their inability to have children. And so when I'm in that space of, you know, kids are driving me crazy, fatherhood is not beautiful today, or whatever, I try to think about like those people's anguish and how, you know, they would give everything just to have, you know, the worst parenting moments that you and I have. They would give anything just to have those. And so we're always looking for new perspectives. And very often it's the perspective of another person that really enlightens the way we look at a question. So I hope that's helpful. And we'll go back to Evan and get the next question. Or maybe we have lost Evan. All right, sorry about that. Had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we are back now. And I got the next question from Instagram. I feel I can't find what I need because I have thoughts in too many places. Any advice would be great. Yeah, so I think it's I think this is a common phenomenon. We have so much in our lives. We get to thinking all over the place. Our minds running from one place to the next. And we have a hard time settling on the things that we need to focus on, or in the midst of the whirlwind of all that thinking, we have a hard time working out, what we really want and what we're really called to. I think one thing, our mind is like our space. It's like our physical space in some ways. And sometimes our physical space needs to be decluttered. We need to clean up our space, give some things away, throw some things away, and tidy up, get organized. And interestingly, sometimes even that process of tidying up your physical space can help you organize your thoughts, can help you organize your priorities, can help you get a sense of what matters most and what matters least. Apart from that, there are many meditation techniques designed to help exactly what you describe in your question. One is just to sit in a quiet place and to reflect and to think of yourself as being next to maybe a river. And as different thoughts come to your mind, there's these boats on the river. And just take one of your thoughts and just put it on a boat and just let it go down the river. And then another thought comes to your mind. You just take that thought, put it on a boat, and let it go down the river. All the time, trusting that, if God wants to bring that thought back to you, if the Holy Spirit wants to bring that thought back to you, he will bring that thought back to you. I think is another powerful way for us to declutter our mind. One of the reasons this is important is because we live in a culture where we have a lot of thoughts, we have a lot of stimulation, we have a lot of information, we have a lot of stuff, we have a lot of commitments, and sometimes our lives get so full that the things we really want and the things that God really wants for us cannot come into our lives because our lives are just too full. Our lives are full and cluttered and overflowing with commitments and stuff and thoughts and information. And so the things we really want, the things God really wants to give us, take a look at our life and say, there's no room in there for me. And so if you do have the sense that something is missing, or if you do have the sense, I feel overwhelmed, or there's just too much going on, or I cannot work out what I really want, I cannot work out what I am being called to, start to declutter your life, start to declutter your mind, your physical space, your schedule, create some empty spaces. Create some empty spaces in your heart, in your mind, in your physical space, in your schedule. Create some empty spaces so that the things that you yearn for and the things that God yearns to give you have room to come into your life. Have room to come into your life. So thanks for posting your question on Instagram. I think Evan might be back with us. And if Evan's back with us, we'll have him give us the next question. And if he isn't, oh, welcome. Very good. That's a fantastic question. One of the phenomenon we're experiencing in our culture today is cancel culture. And it's a reflection really of the values that exist or that are celebrated primarily in social media, but then are leaking out into society as a whole. And what cancel culture says is there's no forgiveness. There's no forgiveness. There's no second chances. There's no fresh starts. There's no great comeback. You're just done. And so as we start to get into just this one aspect of social media, how it's affecting our culture, and particularly the cancel culture piece of that, you realize, wow, I mean, do we really want to live in a world without forgiveness? I don't want to live in a world with no forgiveness. And mostly because I know I need it. I know I need it often on a regular basis. So I don't want to live in a world without forgiveness. And I suspect that most people don't. But we don't realize that this is what is essentially happening around us at this moment in history. If we go back to your question, you You say you've ruined the relationship. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I have seen relationships that have been bruised and battered in devastating ways come back to life and be better than ever before, and as Christians, we're called to be people of possibility. We're called to be people of hope. We're called, our God is a God of new beginnings. He's a God of second chances. He loves a good comeback. And he's a God of forgiveness. I think what I would say to you is tell this person how you feel. And tell this person how you feel in the way that is best for him or her to hear that. It may be having a conversation, but that may not be the way. It may be writing a letter and just saying, hey, I know I did this. I'm sorry I did this. I know I hurt you. But not having you in my life, this is how not having you in my life is affecting me. And speak to them about that. Because I think what that does is it opens the door. It builds a bridge back for that person to come back over. Sometimes when a relationship breaks down, a lot of things are said in the heat of the moment. And then people cling stubbornly to the things they have said out of pride. And, sometimes we need to give them permission to overcome that, to move on from that. So, I would tell this person how you feel, possibly in a letter. And then I would wait. I would tell the person, listen, you don't have to respond right now. There will be a moment. If that moment is right now, great. If that moment's a month from now or a year from now, great. That it's on their time, and that you understand it's on their time, because you have no control over it. And then to be patient, I think, and see what God does, see what life does. See, does this person circle back into your life? That being said, I think some people come into our lives for a season. They come into our lives for a season, and they come into our lives for a reason. And then they move on. Our paths diverge, and they move on to live their lives, and we move on to live our lives. Some people come into our lives for a lifetime, and sometimes it's hard to know which is which. And so this person might have been brought into your life for a season. And sometimes people come into our lives for a season, and then they go off and live their lives, and then they come back into our lives for another season or many, many more seasons. So I think it's important to be mindful of that. And then the last thing I will say is that sometimes when we're very, very focused on something, we don't see anything else. You're very, very focused. It's clear you're very, very focused on this relationship. And I don't know the details of the relationship, so it's impossible for me to comment on the particulars. But it's important not to be so focused on this relationship that you miss out on the fact that God is bringing this other person into your life over here, or this other group of people into your life over here. And so to take time to step back from this relationship, to scan the horizon and to see everything that's happening in your life, relationally and emotionally at this point of time. And I say that understanding that requires a certain level of detachment, certain level of peace and calm to approach it, and that is not always possible. And I appreciate that. But I think that if we are able to do that, great. If we're not able to do that, then let that be our prayer. Say, God, I really wish I could step back and survey this and look at this from the long view and look at the big picture, but my nose is right up against this thing at the moment. Please help me. Let that be your prayer. Just please help me to gain some perspective on this, to step back from this and gain some perspective on this. Thanks for your question from Facebook. Who's next, Evan?
All right. We've got one from the live chat. Who is this? I apologize, I missed your name here. It is, when life doesn't turn out the way you plan it to, was curious how to recharge yourself and know when you need rest.
Fantastic question. I think anytime life doesn't turn out the way we expect it to, in any sort of significant way, we may not need a rest, but we need to regroup. And knowing how to regroup is very, very important. Usually when life doesn't turn out the way we expect it to, we experience some type of trauma. And we don't talk about trauma very much. We experience a lot more trauma than we talk about. We tend to reserve trauma to enormous things that happen. But the reality is anytime life doesn't turn out the way we expected, we experience some sort of trauma, and it could be a mini trauma, or it could be a major trauma, or it could be anywhere on the spectrum. But I think it's important to acknowledge that, because unacknowledged trauma does tend to grow into all sorts of other problems, and so to regroup and say, okay, I've been a little bit traumatized here, or I've been a lot traumatized here. Where do we go from here? And not to be in a hurry to work that out, because I think very often when life doesn't turn out the way we expected, we're like scrambling to put together a new plan. And under those conditions, we will almost never put together a great plan. We will almost never come to the plan that is best for us. You did mention the terms rest and energy, and I think it is worth speaking for a moment about that. In the Psalms, over and over in the scriptures, God rewards, his people with rest. God rewards his people with sleep in Proverbs. We do need rest, and we need it in many forms, so we need sleep. We need times that are devoid of stress. Almost impossible to do if we don't unplug from the many technological devices that we've given place to in our lives. Nature, very, very powerful. When you're looking to regroup, nature is your friend. You're looking to de-stress, nature is your friend. You're looking to get leisure, in its truest sense of the word. You're looking to get rest, restoration. Nature is your best friend. And we have this yearning for energy because our experience of life expands or contracts according to how much energy we have. Okay, that's not a small thing. Our experience of life, our capacity for life, is dependent on how much energy we have. We touched on it for a moment last week, but this is a really, really important piece, and so to ask yourself what type of rest is appropriate, to ask yourself what type of rest is going to re-energize me, what type of rest is going to bring me new levels of energy. We look at some of the breakthroughs in history that come like in direct relation to God's wisdom of, let's say, the Sabbath, resting on the Sabbath. the farmer who first decided to let his field rest. His neighbors probably thought he was an idiot. But the next year he had a bumper crop. And then everyone was copying him. And this became great wisdom, changed the agricultural system in many, many parts of the world. The idea of allowing a field to rest. And if a resting field, if you allow a field to rest and then it produces a bumper crop, how much more true is that for a human being? And so at different times in our lives, we need different periods of rest. If you think about the idea of a sabbatical, usually doesn't exist in many places now. I think it still exists in some academic fields or environments, rather. The idea that after 10 years, we would take some break, however long that may be. I think that's an important thing for us to think about. And our sabbatical doesn't have to be long. What's more important is that it's intentional, that we can look to it and say, I am going to do this on the 10th year. I'm going to take this sabbatical. Well, thanks for your question. What's next, Devin?
All right, we'll go back to the YouTube live chat here. Sue Maraska asks, how do you get the courage to move forward, to change, or to fulfill a new goal or dream? How do you take the first step?
Yeah, I think it depends on a few things. One is, what was your last experience of dreams? Did you fulfill your last dream? Did you achieve your last dream? Or are you coming out of an experience where you had a dream and that dream got crushed? Because life and other people do sometimes crush our dreams. That is real. The other thing that could have happened is that we stopped dreaming. I wrote a book about this whole concept, the dream manager, and, for 2 decades been encouraging people to dream. The Rhythm of Life, I talked about my own dream book and how I jot down, my hopes and dreams for my life. And, but a few years ago, I came to this place where I realized I'd stopped dreaming. I'm like, how is this possible? Like, I'm always warning people that this can happen and teaching them how to avoid that from happening. And here I am all of a sudden, and I had stopped dreaming, and, life had got busy, 5 kids, just a lot of things going on. And you stop dreaming. And I think that's a hard place to get from. If you've had a dream that's been accomplished, you're moving on to the next dream, that's one thing. If you've had a dream that's been crushed and you're moving on to the next dream, that's also one thing. But, an object in motion stays in motion. And, but when we have stopped dreaming, it's hard to find those muscles and start dreaming again. They tend to have atrophied, and so it's important to go back to basics. Basics for me, I've always kept a list of 100 dreams, update the list every year. You might say, 100 dreams, that's so many. Actually, it isn't when you think about it. In the book, The Dream Manager, I talk about 12 areas. And so you come up with 7 or 8 in each area, you got your 100 dreams. And the truth is, many of our dreams are more than accomplishable if we become very, very intentional about it. And the other thing is, once you write these dreams down, they will start to manifest in your life. I tell people all the time, we do this exercise in the corporate world. Write down your 100 dreams. Yes, if you're skeptical, just put them in an envelope, seal the envelope, put it in your bedside table. Don't open it for 3 years. 3 years when you open it, you will be amazed how many of those dreams you have accomplished. Amazed how many of those dreams you've accomplished. Because they go into our mind, they go into our hearts, they go into our souls, and we just start to work on them consciously and subconsciously. So I would say, make a list of your dreams. And dream without limits, and don't judge your dreams, and don't limit your dreams, and don't say, I'll never be able to do this because, you know, my wife isn't interested, or my husband isn't interested, or my kids won't go along with that, or I'll never have the time, or I'll never have the money. Put all that aside when you dream. Just put all that aside. Dream without limits. Just put down anything that comes to your mind. Don't judge it. Don't edit it. Just write it down, 100 dreams. And then pick 2 or 3 that you really want to work on. Some dreams just require that we say, okay, we're going to do that now. And you come up with a plan and you execute the plan. Other dreams are more complicated than that. And the bigger dreams sometimes need to be broken into smaller dreams. You know, so you might have this big dream and maybe you break the dream into 5 or 6 pieces. Especially if you're a little timid, if you've had a bad experience and had some of your dreams crushed in life, really encourage you to just break your dreams up into smaller pieces so that you can accomplish that on a timeline and then move on to the next piece. And as you do that, your confidence will grow, and your belief will grow, you know, that this dream has been brought into your life for a reason. Who's next, Evan?
All right. We'll go back to Facebook from earlier in the day. So talking about what happens when life doesn't go as planned, Vivian Yanati says, to me, this is resilience and grit, things I desperately want for my children. I'm curious if you have any advice on how to teach or develop this in children.
Yeah. So resilience is important. Resilience and grit are important. How do we teach them to our children? It's an unpopular answer, but the reality is we teach them to our children by allowing our children to fail, by allowing our children to make mistakes, by allowing our children to face their problems head on, with our support, but not solving their problems for them all the time. I think the biggest mistake we can make in this modern context of parenting is to try and make our children's lives easy. Life is not easy. Life is not meant to be easy. If we try to make our children's life easy, we will absolutely fail. And in the process, we will damage them in ways that we probably cannot even begin to imagine or understand. And so these are the ways that we allow our children to discover and learn what you describe as resilience and grit. But it is also the way we prepare our children for life. You know, it's as the saying goes, our job as parents is not to prepare the road for our children. And there's a temptation, right? It's a temptation to see what's coming down the road for our kids and to smooth out the road. But our job as parents is not to prepare the road for our children. Our job as parents is to prepare our children for the road. Because at some point, sometime, somewhere, you and I inevitably will not be there to smooth the road before them. And at those moments, if we have not allowed them to have challenges, to struggle, to fail, to experience the difficulties of life in proportion to their age, we will discover that we have done them, I think, a massive disservice. So I hope that's helpful. And back to you, Evan.
All right. So the next one's not exactly a question, more of a comment for you, and I want to get your reaction. So maybe it was my fault. Life has not turned out as I'd hoped. Maybe I did not try hard enough to right all the wrongs. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I guess that couple of words or phrases jump out at me there. My fault. Maybe it was my fault. And then the other one is hard enough. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. We tend to think to ourselves, okay, if I had tried harder, the outcome would have been different. And maybe it would have, but maybe it wouldn't have. And I think it's possible that you could have tried twice as hard as you tried, and the outcome would still be exactly the same. And you would still know that you could have tried a little bit harder. And so these are the sorts of things that I think we sometimes torture ourselves psychologically. Maybe it was your fault. Okay, maybe it was. We make mistakes. We're human beings. So if it was your fault, and take responsibility for your part of that, I think that's important to know that, okay, in some way, this was my fault. The whole thing wasn't my fault, but in some way, this was my fault. And I take responsibility for that part of it. Did you try hard enough to right all the wrongs? Is that even possible? Is it possible to right all the wrongs? I don't think it is. I think that, you know, as we started off talking about my new book, life is messy, and wish that we could put everything back together that gets broken, but we can't. And wish that we could right all the wrongs, but we can't. And so there is a mystery in all of this. But I think to go into the question and to ask yourself, all right, what is God trying to teach me here so that my onward journey is different? What is God trying to teach me here so that I don't make this mistake again in the future? I think is the other piece of an observation like this that is critically important. Because again, getting obsessed about this one situation can keep us from our future, can keep us from other exciting people and possibilities that God is inviting us to experience at this time in our lives. What's next, Evan?
All right, so we'll go back to some of the earlier comments from today. And so the question, how do we see God in it, as in life not turning out the way we planned? Or do we give it over regardless of how it feels and find him in the aftermath?
Yeah. So again, we're setting up the question as a sort of a binary, all or nothing approach, one or the other approach. And again, I wish that life were that simple and that clear cut. How do we see God in anything? It is difficult, right? Especially if it's an emotionally charged situation, you know, if our heart's been broken, if a dream has been crushed, depending on what it is that has caused life not to turn out as you expected, I think that makes it more difficult to be aware of, okay, where is God in this? What is God doing in this? What is God saying to me in this? What is God teaching me in this? How is God using this situation to prepare me for future possibilities, opportunities, experiences? I think that, again, we talked earlier about like the idea of, if life doesn't turn out as you expected in a particular situation, you will experience some form of torture, of trauma. Could be a mini trauma, micro trauma, macro trauma, anywhere on the spectrum. When we're in a state of trauma, it is generally not a good time to make big decisions. And so when we're in a state of trauma, it should become an introspective time, I think, a time for us just to sit down and try and be still. And, you know, that's, for me, that's a real indicator. How agitated am I? How traumatized have I been? How angry am I? How restless am I? I can work most of that out just by sitting down in a chair and just trying to sit there and observing, am I comfortable sitting there? Am I fidgeting? Do I want to fidget? Do I immediately want to get up and go somewhere or do something? Or am I able to sit and just be still? And maybe, you know, you experience a trauma today and you try this exercise just to sit down and sit still and just be tomorrow, and you don't even last 2 minutes. Well, then you return again the next day. You sit down and just try to be still and just be, and maybe you last 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And to expand that period of time where you can just sit and be still and just be, I think, is a good indicator of sort of where we're at with what we've just experienced, and allows us to absorb, okay, what has just happened to me? Where is God in all of this? Before moving on to, you know, whatever it is, God is calling us to next. Next question, Evan.
Okay, so there's a lot of comments in the chat asking about what do you do when your family members are resistant to how your next stage of life, when life doesn't turn out the way you planned, you need to move on to the next stage of your life, but your family members are resistant. What is your advice for that?
Family members are always resistant. No, I think this is real. This is something we experience, not only with family members, but with friends. And what you have to understand is that anytime you change, anytime you grow, you are going to make other people uncomfortable. That's just inevitable. You are going to make other people uncomfortable. Anytime you change, anytime you grow. And sometimes you make them so uncomfortable, they don't want to be in your life anymore. And if that's family, that's tragic, right? But even if it's friends, lifelong friends, can be just as heartbreaking and tragic. But you have to honor your journey. You know, you are responsible for honoring your journey. They are responsible for honoring their journey. You can't make their journey for them, and their journey might not be with you. And that is, sometimes that's just life. But as we spoke about earlier, these things do tend to have seasons. I think about growing up in Australia with my brothers and my parents. I have 7 brothers. And one of the things I noticed now looking back over life is that I was closer with different brothers at different stages of my life. And my other brothers were closer with different brothers at different stages of their lives, depending on what was happening in their life and what was going on. And in some cases, I've been very close with a brother for a period of my life. And then, you know, that has sort of gone away. And then it's come back at another time, depending on what was going on in each of our lives. And so Many things that are lost are not lost forever. Some things are, but many things that are lost are not lost forever. And I think we come back to that line that, we started with in the beginning. Life doesn't unfold according to our plans, but sooner or later, we each have to decide how we are going to make the most of our one brief, unexpected life. It is then that we come face to face with two enduring truths. We cannot live without hope that things will change for the better. We are not victims of our circumstances. We can't live without hope. Who are the people and the things that bring you hope? We're not victims of our circumstances. You get to make new choices every day. God bless you. Have a great night. Wonderful to be with you again.